We are now in the decade of the ocean, and you may or may not have heard of a term flying around that is supposed to help the oceans and lands and protect biodiversity. The term is 30 by 30. It means 196 nations have pledged to protect 30% of lands and oceans by the year 2030. It's a great goal that can help our environment and the human species from climate change, water pollution, plastic pollution, overfishing, and other human disturbances. However, the number could just mean that politicians will focus on just the quantity and not the quality of the protected areas. The Center for American Progress would like to see that quality over quantity scenario, and I am going to talk about it on this episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast and talk about where the U.S. needs to focus based on this article. Let's start the show. Hey everybody, welcome back to another exciting episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. I am your host, Andrew Lewin. This is the podcast where you find out what's happening with the ocean, how you can speak up for the ocean, and what you can do to live for a better ocean. And as you can see, my voice hasn't really come back fully yet. I feel like every time I do a podcast, I really notice my voice crackling or giving that real bass kind of sound. I don't know what's going on. I have no idea. I mean, I just had COVID a couple weeks ago. I was at a tournament 2 weekends ago, and yeah, man, it's just that's the way it goes. So hopefully my voice will come back and it won't affect the quality of this podcast. And speaking of quality, we're talking about 30 by 30, and you may have heard this is, protecting lands and oceans, 30% of it by 2030. It's a big, big number that you've seen if you've looked at anything in regards to marine or land protection. You've heard that 30 by 30 number. At some point in time, you've heard that 30 by 30 number. And it's the focus of a lot of nations, 196 to be exact, that signed on to this. And, it's great to have these types of numbers. And it's very similar to when the Canadian government, the federal government, said, hey, we need to protect up to 15% of our marine space, right? Our oceans within the exclusive economic zone, because that'll help us protect. We were at 1%, so the government got to 15%. And every time they announced a new marine protected area, they started to say, hey, we're actually at this percentage now, whether it be 3% or 4% or 10% or whatever that might be, and we're on our way to hit 15%. They hit 15%, and that was by 2020 or 2019, and now they're on their way to 2030. They actually just declared a marine protected area just recently at IMPAC, which is a conference, IMPAC 5, which is a conference about marine protected areas worldwide. But they made that announcement because the IMPAC happened in Canada, in Vancouver, and was the place to make that announcement, increasing their percentage a little bit more, and that's great. It's good to always protect something. However, what is protected is really what's happening. How it's put together is really where it counts. How it's going to be enforced is really gonna count. How it's going to be evaluated is really going to count, and who is involved in that evaluation is really going to count. And in the U.S. and other countries, it's no different, right? We have to have a certain expectation. We have to have a certain protocol to ensure that protected areas are going to be protected in the future, and not just going to be what we call a land park or a paper park. Not a land park, a paper park. A paper park is essentially, it's a park on paper, it's been declared and everything, but it's not enforced. People can do whatever they want with it within reason, and they'll get away with it. And the difficult part about marine protected areas especially is that it's very difficult to monitor, right? Because some of these marine protected areas are thousands of square kilometers, and a lot of times they're remote, and so it's not easy for someone to continually monitor that area. We can do it through satellites, but even then we don't get real-time satellite data all the time for this type of stuff. And when we do get it, it's hard to identify the ships that are involved in these types of things, and it can make it pretty difficult. But in this article that I'm covering today, it's from the Center of American Progress, called why conserving 30 by 30 is more than a numbers game. And it was, the authors are Drew McConville and friend of the show, friend of the podcast, friend of mine, Angelo Villagomez. And this is it's a well-placed and well-timed article, right? They talk about how President Joe Biden issued an executive order establishing a first-of-its-kind national goal of conserving 30% of the U.S. lands and oceans by 2030, and later expanding on his commitment through his America the Beautiful initiative. So that, there seems to be a want in the government to be able to do this type of stuff. However, when they said heated arguments came out about what counts, and it could miss a much bigger point behind this national 30 by 30 conservation goal. The ambitious 30 by 30 target can and really must be an inclusive call to action, a promise to jointly address the climate and biodiversity crises by accelerating the pace at which the country is protecting nature. So in other words, let's not wait till 2030. Let's do it now. Let's accelerate that pace. But when we accelerate the pace, we have to make sure that certain things need to be done. So they cover 4 major things. So they talk about, and this is all based in the U.S. or for the U.S. So it's essentially, we're going to cover those. So the United States must do much more to address the nature crisis. So essentially, more work is needed to conserve the country's lands, waters, and wildlife. It continues onshore. The U.S. Is losing natural areas at an astonishing rate, the equivalent of one football field every 30 seconds. That's insane. And an extinction crisis threatens animal and plant species across the country, of course, and globally. The current catalog of the nation's protected lands and waters in the U.S. Geological Survey's Protected Area Database shows us only at 13% of U.S. lands have permanent conservation protection that excludes extractive use. It's only 13%. We're supposed to get to 30%. While new data will likely improve this estimate and new accounting methods could slightly increase the number, the United States will undoubtedly fall far short of its 2030 goal for durable land conservation. On the offshore part, ocean conservation also demands significantly more attention regardless of the existing protections that are tallied. Because the decline of the oceans occurs below surface and out of the view, the reality of this loss is obscure. Nevertheless, the planet has lost half its coral reefs since 1950, and many charismatic and commercially important species are threatened with extinction. So, for example, snow crabs have disappeared in Alaska, and right whale populations in the Atlantic Ocean have continued to decline severely. So, they kind of mention a couple of things here. The Hawaiian Pacific Island territories, and many of these struggled with some protected areas have struggled with staffing, funding, and completing management plans. Throughout the rest of the country, marine protected areas are mostly absent as a conservation tool. Management measures are area forest fisheries exist across most regions of the country and may be captured in the administration's forthcoming atlas. Now, essentially what's happening is there's 13% of lands that are protected. Oceans is much less. We need to protect them more. We need to protect them faster. That's essentially what the take-home message is here. There are pathways, this is the second one, there are pathways to achieve major conservation gains quickly. So imagine that. We could do that quickly. And in this article, they talk about the America the Beautiful for All Coalition. It was recently released, and this coalition recently released a shared policy agenda for 2023 that outlines a set of equitable conservation priorities to help achieve the Biden administration's 30 by 30 and Justice 40 goals. This coalition, which the Center of American Progress, or for American Progress, has joined, comprises of nearly 150 groups, including frontline organizations, indigenous communities, and communities of color, mainstream green groups, wildlife and ocean conservation organizations, hunters and anglers, businesses, land trusts, and others. So this coalition is big. So they put forward 20 policy priorities to achieve America the Beautiful goals, including supporting increase opportunities for co-management of public lands and waters with tribes, Native Hawaiians, Alaska Natives, and U.S. territories. And so leveraging the Antiquities Act of 1906 to protect ecologically and culturally important areas, and supporting a network of marine protected areas across the country. So, there are people that have put themselves in place, and organizations who put themselves in a place where they are ready to support the government. They are ready to help out the government in getting this access. Now, that's something that's huge, because although the government is great and has a lot of, the government in terms of NOAA is great and has a lot of capabilities, it's great to go outside the government and be able to partner, which they often do, partner with various organizations, various individuals who know more about marine protected areas in specific places than others do within the government. So having that would be really, really great. So in a November 2022 report from its series of executive action to address the nature crises, the Center for American Progress took a deeper look into the most powerful conservation tools available to President Biden. So in particular, the report identifies the top 8 most impactful opportunities for near-term executive action. So just by taking those, you could actually do that. So include opportunities to design new marine protected areas, expand national wildlife refuges, exclude sensitive and sacred places from drilling and mining, and establish national rules to guide conservation of U.S. Bureau of Management lands and the country's oldest federal-owned forests. So another publication where CAP highlights specific community and tribally led proposals for national monuments and marine sanctuaries, already primed for executive action, from the proposed Avi-Kwa Ami National Monument in Nevada to the Chumash Heritage National Marine Sanctuary in California. I apologize if I mispronounce those. Chumash, maybe? I mispronounce any of those words. And then enacting the recommendations will deliver real conservation benefits. So essentially what they're saying here is that there are policies, there are recommendations that can really drastically increase that number with quality based on these reports and these actions. So all the government has to do is just look at these actions. The work has been done, do a little bit more work, and get over that hump to increase that 13% and increase the marine protected area coverage as well. Okay, the third thing that they recommend is executive action must deliver quality conservation and not just quantity. And when they talk about this, I'm going to try and summarize this as best as possible without reading it. But essentially, when you're looking for biodiversity conservation, you have to look just beyond the 30% number, right? Or the proposed acreage, the number on the proposed acreage. It doesn't necessarily mean the bigger, the better. Although oftentimes that's the case, it doesn't always mean that. And so each marine protected area has their own value within this whole landscape, and it's looking at landscape style coverage, or even landscape diversity. If you think about it, one of the things that we always looked at when I was in grad school, my supervisor wrote a paper with WWF with a co-author, Brian Day, and what they looked at was looking at how protected areas should be distributed. There are representative protected areas, especially in the marine world, where it's protecting what you would expect to see in a particular area. Fish, invertebrates, marine mammals, sea turtles, so forth, seabirds, so forth. What you'd expect to see at that any place in time during that, in that area. And then you have distinctive areas. And now you have when distinctive areas are like something that's really unique. It could be an upwelling that attracts a number of predators and marine mammals and sea turtles and so forth, and fish and seabirds. And so you have this sort of aggregation site, and that could happen at certain times of the year. And so these unique areas might need to be treated a little differently. You could have a whale feeding area. You could have a spawning area. Or a nursery habitat. There's all these different sort of unique discoveries that we make that can be there for this area. Making sure that an area that's protected has a number of these areas within those is like an area that has nursery habitat, spawning areas, that kind of stuff, will help, increase the value of that marine protected area, and I think that's really important. There are a couple of examples in here that I'll link to the episode. I'll link to this article in the episode show notes so you can check it out. And then finally, America's conservation mission must be inclusive. And this is probably one of the most important parts of the article. It's talking about inclusivity. And the administration, the Biden administration, put out an exclusive vision within this America the Beautiful report. And leading conservation organizations have likewise called for recognizing and supporting a continuum of conservation actions within and beyond the 30% goal. An accounting exercise to measure the country's progress should not undermine that shared mission. So it's not just about protection, it's about who's involved in this protection, how is it going to be protected, who uses the area. It has to be inclusive. It has to include the right people, the right ocean users or the right land users at the right time. You can't do it as an afterthought. You can't do it in the middle of the process. You have to do it when the process begins. This is something that's extremely important, and you cannot exclude any of these types of people that are going to have a say. And so overall, what this article is trying to do, and I completely agree with it, is trying to say that there are certain ways to move forward. Moving forward where you just arbitrarily pick a 30% number or locations that add up to 30% is not a good way forward. And we do have to be careful because sometimes politicians just want to have that number saying, hey, at the end of my constituency or at the end of my run or my office run, I did this. And so I'm going to use that to get elected again, or I'm going to use that as part of my legacy. But if it's not done properly, then we're not winning this game. Right? The game is, let's make sure the oceans don't change further. We need to protect the oceans. We need to protect biodiversity. We need to buffer against climate change by putting in protected areas. That is one of the tools in the conservation tool belt. Yes, we can still manage fisheries quotas. Yes, we can still manage and need to manage water pollution. All these things are extremely important. We still need to collect together as a community and still need to do, beach cleanups and still need to fight for, the right to have access to the ocean, fight for the right to be able to protect the ocean. That is what we're doing in these cases. And this is just one of those tools, and it's important that we just don't get caught up in the number, but we get caught up in the quality in that number. So yes, we could reach 30% and we get, a good amount covered, but not everything and not what's valuable. Or we can get 28%, 25% and get value for our money, get value for the effort because we've protected it properly. We did all the things that were mentioned in this article and more. And I just think it's something that we need to do. So I would love to hear your opinion on this. Do you think that a lot of countries are just going to use the 30 by 30 as a number and just going to protect 30% of the ocean and their lands within their country's bounds? Or do you think they're actually going to take it for what it's worth and say, hey, we're going to try and put a lot of value on this? Because I know that's what a lot of people are trying to do. It's just whether you think they'll actually achieve it. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Hit me up on Instagram at How to Protect the Ocean on Instagram. That's at How to Protect the Ocean. You can also hit me up if you go to speakupforblue.com. That's speakupforblue.com, and you can reach out to us through the contact page. It goes that email goes right to me. So just fill out that email. Let me know your thoughts. And I want to thank you so much for joining us on this episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Liu, and hopefully my voice will get better soon enough. But anyway, if I don't talk to you before then, have a great time. Have a great day. We'll talk to you soon, and happy conservation.